A sem k nám se připojí pan Virdee. Já zatím představím, postupně budou hosté přicházet. Ano, tady už ho vidíme. Pan Virdee je konzultantem a je ředitelem, je z Královské statistické společnosti a Statistického úřadu Velké Británie. A dál bych chtěla poprosit, aby přišla paní Aet Rahe, která je ředitelkou oddělení informačních technologií z Ministerstva hospodářství a komunikací v Estonsku. A dalším hostem panelu je pan Hazdra, inovační specialista z Centra pro inovace a design služeb z Filozofické fakulty Masarykovy univerzity v Brně. Dobrý den. So we are complete and we will continue the panel in English as it was in the first case. So let me speak English. Probably it will be more comfortable for us here. We have a new representative here, I mean a new country coming, which is Estonia. So maybe if I can ask you to start with, to say a little bit how the Estonian case is in the moment for our better orientation as we have this new element here.
So, thank you very much. Hi to everybody. First of all, to conclude the presentations, whoever is dealing with legislation portal in Czech Republic, I would be happy to give you a presentation of Estonian version, which is now available in English as well. So it would be good to share some experience or your plans as well. But regarding open data, let's say we are not as proactive as UK has been in this area. We have been more concentrated on creating electronic services, automating the public sector. Maybe during the panel, in some of the questions and answers, I will give you some reasons why we have taken that approach, which now means that we have actually created a lot of the services ourselves without opening the data up, which means that now the pressure opening the data from the market is not as big as it might be if we hadn't had so many e-services. So yeah, I would say that one of the biggest challenges we are facing at the moment is to get the community involved and create another layers of services on top of the things that have been done by the government already.
Mm-hmm. You have been working in business before, right? In a big software company. So how was it for you to move to the government sphere in terms of mindset and serving people in these different environments? Can you compare?
Yes, sure. I've been working in the public sector for about 9 months now. And I would say that I'm quite pleasantly surprised. Of course, working in the private sector, everybody has the impression that the people in the public sector are lazy and and don't do the right things or are focusing on the wrong things or whatever. But yes, I must admit that it's been a pleasure to work for the government, especially because of the, let's say, IT area in the Estonian government is quite in the top of the priorities. So maybe that's the part that makes it so much fun.
So is there this kind of client approach when we talk about citizens?
Yes and no. On one hand, we have automated a lot, as I mentioned before, and the main pressure to do that is the fact that we are a small country, we are poor, basically. So, automation is the best way to offer high-quality services. But having said that, even though we have automated a lot and created a lot of services so that people don't actually have to go to government offices anymore, they can just use the e-services. I would say that the focus has not been enough on the customer service because the government is monopoly in majority of the areas. So we are, let's say, wiping off a lot of things in upcoming years and recreating a lot of services because of that.
Mm-hmm. Dev, you are a consultant, you are working for a long time in statistics. Can you please briefly tell us in the beginning, because we have new faces here, your philosophy regarding open data, why you believe in that, and what is maybe your biggest concern on the contrary? I will ask all of you to do this in really 2 sentences, if you are able to do that.
I think statisticians have been involved in the open data agenda, in quotes, for a long, long time, in the sense that it's a passion for us statisticians to have our statistics used. Otherwise, there's no point in producing the numbers that we produce.
So you look really happy. I can see.
But at the same time, there are roles that we play which require us to be independent of politicians and others. And so we need to sort of take a slightly different view sometimes. Also, some of the sort of consequences of open data, we heard this morning so much about the UK examples, which are very positive. Sometimes they can have a negative impact as well, and so we have to be cautious about that. For example, the behavioural impacts on the expenses claims, which are very beneficial, that we heard that the actual claims went down. In another example that we can give, for example, in administrative crime data that are used for crime statistics, where because they get used as indicators, those recording crime can start recording it differently or be reluctant to record some crimes to show that there's less crime happening in their areas. And so as a consequence of that, in the UK Statistics Authority, which sort of gives a stamp of authority for official statistics, they've just last month removed that stamp of authority from recorded crime statistics because of concerns about how crime is recorded. And a big part of that impact was because they were being used for official statistics, and people can see crime in this area, is it going up or down? It has an impact on the officers recording the crime. If it's a small incident where they used to record it formally, now they try to deal with it without it getting into the official system. And that has been a big concern. So there are those sort of aspects that we have to be cautious of. And how do we as statisticians then make sure that the statistics are robust, that you can compare over time? That's a big concern that we've now got to return to.
Thank you. Adam, what's your point of view? Was positive and negative side?
Hello everybody. I'm kind of an outlier here because my background is not in statistical analysis or open data as such. My job is innovation, design thinking, and most specifically service design, which is a new approach to creating services. So I would be very cautious of making any statement on the situation in the Czech Republic when it comes to open data and stuff. But I believe that throughout the panel I can contribute some insights on customer-centric services and human-centered design, which is a practically unknown topic among the Czech public services. Last year we did a research on how people see public services as compared to the other ones, and the public services as such were seen as the second worst services in the Czech Republic, just after the real estate agents. But the approach that I'm concerned with, which is sometimes called human-centered design, sometimes customer-oriented or innovation, is quite universal. And the service design is such. 10 years ago in the UK was first applied for public services. Like Kent City Council was one of the first institutions in the UK who actually adopted this kind of approach. And so I think that we can definitely this afternoon think of ways how to improve the public services using that approach. All right?
Okay, thank you. John?
I pick out 2 things for this conversation. One is the value of making service performance information available as open data as a way of helping to unlock some service improvement. And the other, which has been touched on before, but it's the relationship between how government spends its money and what it gets in return, particularly when it's spending its money with companies to deliver services on its behalf. And open data in that arena can help drive both efficiency savings and real value for money. And I think those are some of the sweet spots for open data in terms of improved public services, is getting more bang for our buck.
And concerns?
There's always a question of unintended consequences, and I think Dev's point about measuring the wrong thing and then suddenly the world starts reorganizing itself around the measurement rather than what you're really interested in is something that we always have to be alive to when we set out to measure things and have key performance indicators and so on. It's one of the reasons why I like an approach where we try and use more of our exhaust data, if you like, more of the data that we just generally gather and collect through delivering services, and then apply an analysis to that, because it's you're starting from something that's less mediated. So I think particularly some of the kind of the big data technologies and big data approaches around administrative exhaust data that we can process can give us some particularly valuable insights, rather than the kind of fixation on KPIs that you then find people start working their way around.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep.
About concerns regarding open data, one of the main things that we are very concerned about in Estonia is related to, again, big data and the mosaic effect of if you combine enough data sets, then you can personalize the data again, or misuse because of the fact that the available data sets create the ability to add enough attributes to get more information out of it than it was intended. So this is actually a huge concern, and one of the main things that our government officials point out when we look at them and say that why haven't you opened your data up? Oh, okay, thank you. By the way, in Estonia we have a Public Information Act in place since 2000, and since 2012 there's an obligation to open up all government registers in machine-readable format. So you can imagine how big of a concern that big data effect is for us.
I think it is important to talk also about these maybe problematic sides of it, because we all agree that there is a lot of enthusiasm about positive effects, but this shouldn't be neglected at the same time. So let's concentrate a little bit on the perception and reading of the data sets that are then public. What is, in your point of view, the role of media? Because journalists could help a lot to translate it somehow for people, to make them understand that, but sometimes they can also mistranslate and do the harm, maybe. So do you believe there could be some mechanisms to work with journalists, to help productions that maybe don't have enough resources to understand data, to interpret them, to work with them?
Actually, that fits in very well with the role that I've been covering over the last few months. I'm based at the Royal Statistical Society in the UK, in a role that's actually funded by the UK Statistics Authority to help with user engagement for official statistics. And at the same time, in the Royal Statistical Society, we've got a campaign called Get Stats, which is to improve the understanding of statistics in the public at large. And one of the strands of that is actually training and working with journalists to help them make better use of statistics.
So you have direct experience already with that?
Well, as an institution, yes, the Royal Statistical Society has been working quite a lot in that area. And we take people who are professional statisticians, regular users, train them to be trainers, and then go out and work with journalists, not just existing journalists, but also into the universities, journalists or training colleges and so on. And I think that's quite key. We produce a lot of statistics, but to actually get them used effectively, we need to do more than just produce them, churn them out like a factory. So that's a key part of our role now, as to getting our statistics used more effectively. So we've got a program that we've got going into journalism, but also into Parliament, to have these sort of sessions with members of Parliament, into schools, with a sort of schools campaign, and in other communities, as you identify a community. One particular sort of sector that we found was lacking in their knowledge of how to use statistics, the voluntary sector, where you have big umbrella bodies, and then you have regional bodies who work with the voluntary sort of sector, and then you've got individual sort of local small community groups who might want to know, what do I do to make a case for a nursery in this area? And the whole of that sector, from the top to the lowest level, how do we get them better engaged and raise their awareness of what they don't know? Because they don't know what they don't know in terms of use of better information.
John, how would you describe your experience with media? Are they able to interpret the data generally well? There's all the discipline already for years, data journalism, but maybe sometimes it ends with some kind of nice visualizations, and maybe it doesn't go deep enough to really bring some added value. How is it in Britain? You have Guardian, who is working quite a lot on different stuff. For example, BBC. How is it?
So, I mean, there are some terrific examples of good journalism that references back to data. I think for those of us who come at it from an official perspective, from a government perspective, there are two things to recognise. Firstly is that journalists are interested in a story, and that's a very different prism to look at the world through than interested in evidence and fact, because you're interested in human beings and how things impact them and so on and so on. What I think concretely it means for us is one of the very best things that we can do is provide information, official information, in a way that journalists can link to. So that if they want to make a statement about this piece of legislation says, or these statistics say, make it easy for the journalist to pick up a link and point to the underlying source. And if that source is a government source for statistics or for legislation or something like that where it's trusted, just the act of having a good way of addressing the source is one of the best things that we can do. And we've certainly seen with legislation, journalists increasingly referencing legislation because we have nice ways of addressing it in the UK, and I think that's probably the best thing that we can do.
How is it in Estonia? Do you work often with journalists? Aet, yourself?
I think that the more data you have available, the more difficult it is actually to manipulate with certain facts. So, you know... And
there are many constraints, sorry to interrupt you, but usually journalists don't have enough of time also. It's quite difficult to really work on it properly, etc.
And of course it is dependent on what is the quality of how the data is published exactly. But then again, we have a lot of data available in human readable formats as well in Estonia, for example from the Statistics Office and from Tax and Customs, and but I would say that the majority of the data for media is boring. You know, the majority of the articles that we have seen that have been written based on the data that has been published has been related to either government financial information, whether it's central government or local government. By the way, local government information has been one of the most popular information sources. It has info about where the money comes and how it's spent. Of course, also government official salaries information is very interesting. But other than that, the interest drops quite a lot.
Adam, let's move to you and your effort. So
sure.
Could you describe a little bit, this might sound kind of fashionable thing to design something like that. So what do you design actually now?
That's a long story. We're actually helping a big bank to redesign mortgages, and we are trying to improve library services in Ostrava. We are doing research for a big car manufacturer to understand them how to better, position the new car and stuff like this. It's not just one thing that I'm working on at the moment.
What would you suggest as a designer to improve this public service side?
Actually,
if it is so bad in the results you have mentioned after real estate agents.
This is a very interesting discussion, I have to admit. for me, because especially the discussion around journalists, if I think of services, I think of back end and front end, which means that services have something that the customers doesn't have to see, and they have front end, which is basically a website or a personal that is on some branch office and stuff like this. So when you brought up the topic of journalists, I see them as potential users, potential customers who will be using the data sets. But I will be asking also about the other customers, such as, you know, a typical public user. I would be asking about what role does open data play in the journalist's life, whether it was to better inform the public or to better understand the problem at hand. These are two completely different submissions, I believe. And this actually brings me to the first questions that you asked, and that was about the concerns. So I have, as I said, no background on open data, but still I can definitely see unintended consequences of anything new as one major issue. The mitigation measures that we can take to actually improve it are difficult for any innovation. So it's a question of time and some reasonable and thought through process. However, I can also see from like the service point of view a concern of information overload. I don't know if you've raised this issue throughout the day. I came just like 30 minutes ago. But there may be users who actually appreciate a lot of information and tools to work with it, but there also may be users who actually require less and less information and would like to get it in a more digested form. So as a designer, I would definitely be looking into how people behave, what's their information behavior. That's what we are doing at the university. We are looking into information behavior a lot. And I would be asking questions like this. And when I was coming here, I was also thinking about another aspect that you perhaps help me to answer, and that is accessibility. Because when we are talking about public services, usually issue of universal access comes up, like all the people within a certain region should have access to public services. Is it really so with open data? Isn't open data too bind to computers that not all of the people in population master? That would be my concern. How to make the data that is mostly digital, and we heard that on this panel as well. Isn't it just confined to a certain group that is using computers? The situation is improving, of course, but I don't know. Perhaps you will help me answer this question.
Anybody who would like to help answer this question? Dev, would you try?
No.
Well, with that particular question, I think, again, this is one of the things that, as statisticians, we have to sort of try and get out to a wide range of audiences. And so we shouldn't just be putting statistics out in one form. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's a printed publication, there's a tendency nowadays to stop doing the printed publication, just do things online. And that is very much at the heart of this, I think. Sure. So it's striking that balance. And certainly to reach the small groups that I was mentioning earlier, quite often you need to do things differently. Mm-hmm. Whether it's outreach work, actually going out there through the umbrella bodies in those sectors and going down through them, to have training sessions in the local, improve access to computers through libraries, local libraries. So are the libraries providing the sort of facilities? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm actually going to talk about in my later session was about the UK's neighbourhood statistics service, which one of the aims for that was to produce information at a very local level so that you can then see where the different types of needs might be. So at a local level you can see, okay, in this area you've got a high concentration of elderly people, very poor transport link, no post office nearby and so on. So there's a real need to do something here, whereas another area that's not an issue at all. And it's how you can make better use of that sort of information to inform those sort of issues of accessibility.
I think the other key point is the extent to which people who are providing public services in a context where you maybe have people who lack the ability to get online, or maybe can't read, or maybe lack the ability to process statistical information, or even simple numbers, have trouble reading their bank statement. Delivering public services to people in that kind of context is a hard thing to do, and open data is a terrific way of supporting people who are delivering frontline services. Giving the tools to people who have an amazingly difficult job, reaching hard to reach people, and giving them the foundation and some of the tools that we can now, that we either have or that we can envisage. So I see it very much as, back to Andrew Stott's point of data not knowing what it's for, absolutely open data can help support the delivery of public services to people that are hard to reach or that are disadvantaged, and is a really powerful tool, and we should be using it.
I would really shortly like to comment about that question as well, that you asked about whether we should at least ask the question whether it's a good idea to give people with the ability to use computers advantage of using data. An interesting approach that Denmark has taken. They have chosen the most popular government services and are trying to make them electronic only. It's for us. It's quite interesting. We have a lot of, our most popular services, electronic services, are very highly used. Whether it's tax returns, which can be done with 5 minutes and like 6 clicks, and 98% of population use electronic tax return, or we did e-voting option. And we expected to actually increase the usage among young people, but we actually see that the opposite, the elderly population is starting to use it more and more, because for them it's much easier to use the computer instead of walk 2 kilometers to the polling station. So that's really, really interesting. And our approach has always been that we give the electronic option, but the paper alternative is there. As well. There are some exceptions. For example, we are changing the way our courts are operating at the moment. The legal, let's say, legally binding documents case file is on paper format, but we are changing that so that basically the legally binding folder of court case will be electronic. And compared to paper process, now if you want to see the original of the file set, you have to go to the court. Somebody has to sit next to you to make sure that you don't steal papers from the file. If you want to take something with you, you have to make copies, etc. Instead of that, you open the data up in electronic form and you use your secure ID card to log into the system, and you can use the information wherever you are. So, there are different approaches, and it's a really good question whether, you should prefer the approach that Denmark is taking, making electronical option the only option. That, of course, means that they are obliged to give the support to people who are unable to use the service on their own. We are not so rich. We can't afford that luxury of having the officials everywhere, so we tend to keep the paper option available as well. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
From a UK perspective, listening to the conversation reminded me very much of work that our government digital service has been doing. And we have a thing called the Service Design Manual, and there are 3 points from the Service Design Manual that fit together beautifully on exactly this point. The first is, start with needs, users' needs, not government needs. The second is, design with data. And the third is, make things open, it makes it better. And those 3 things fit together perfectly, and I think really beautifully illustrates why open data is so useful from the perspective of public services reform and improvement.
Yep. Tell me a little bit what you think about this information overload that was mentioned too, because it's a perfect place for manipulation if you want to, and if you use the data, that seems to be something very relevant and serious argument. It's even, I would say, more dangerous sometimes. And the fact is that there is this information overload, and then the brain is not able to absorb so much information, so people maybe are really less concentrated on what they read. What would you say on that topic, because it was raised here too?
You want to start with me again?
Yes.
I suppose, again, I'm going to comment at most of these issues from a statistician's point of view, because I've been the one statistician here, I think it will keep a good role for the official statisticians, or analysts more widely, I think, is to actually to go through that process of digging into the data. Term that used to be of favour, data mining, what can you do with big data, but actually tease out what are the interesting stories, what are the messages in this overload of data, and help people make better use of it. So that's one key role, I think, for statisticians. So actually open data increases the resource of material available to us as statisticians to be able to do more with it and help the general public at large and all users of information. That's just one aspect of our role, I think.
This is a little bit philosophical panel, as we have agreed before. Maybe I didn't tell you, but this is interesting, because maybe we could finish with websites that would how do you call it, but be kind of mythbuster for bad use of data sets and their interpretation. So what's Adam's point of view?
Actually, I changed it from information overload to technology overload, because when I was listening to the other speakers, there are actually two issues I would like to discuss. The first is technology overload. The other is designers' arrogance. I will actually start with that. Okay. Often happens, and I like actually the 3 steps from the UK, but I would add another step at the beginning, which would say start with data and then go for user needs, because even especially for public services where you have a large group of users, you need to look at the data to define the typical users, because there are so many of them that you cannot really underestimate this thing. Which brings me to designers' arrogance. This is something that I see a lot in the field, and this is something of this nature. Usually people with university degrees design services for people without them, which may bring them to thinking that everyone is like them, and that in the end they design services for themselves. This is not really unusual, and in corporate settings this is really, really, really a big issue. If you're designing really services for people from villages and you have no idea how a village person is acting, what the life is and what they really need, it's difficult. That's why, yeah.
How can this be solved?
We definitely work with data as well, because you always need to be sure that it's a good direction that we are taking, and then we go for qualitative research. So we spend a day with an elderly person or with a senior. We go to, to hospitals. We visit villages. We visit, The best research is done at the place where an activity is performed and with the user. Mm-hmm. So we go wherever the design or the design challenge takes us. Which brings me to technology overload, because one of the colleagues mentioned that we are actually, if we had the money, we would afford more technology for the people. I, as a designer, say, does technology really bring better lives? If I was sure that a person in a small Czech village was in a need of technology and in a need of, electronic records, then definitely. But what if they don't care? What if the only touch point with the government is the local post office, as was mentioned here? And what if they want to see everything on the paper? So by technology overload, I mean that I don't see technology as the end, but as the tool for delivering the best services that we can to the people as they like it, not because they must like it.
One of the tools.
Sorry?
One of the tools in your perception.
That's for
Technology,
sure.
because
Paper works. I mean, paper are getting back to paper like hell.
Right?
I hope I won't burst anybody's bubble with the next sentence, but if all the government data is opened up, I mean, all that is, that doesn't have any legal restrictions to open up, etc., or some state security reasons why it should be not opened up, but everything else is opened up, then a huge majority of the data will never be reused. And majority of the citizens, common citizens on the street, will never look at the data that has been opened up, which basically makes me conclude that opening data up is important, absolutely. It helps with building trust towards government, etc., and just knowing that the financial information, for example, is available and I can check when I want to, makes me sleep calmer at night. But if we talk about how to make life easier for the citizen, then good, well-working government services, e-services, or services behind the counter are the things that make the biggest difference, in my opinion. And I totally agree with Adam that the high quality in services is extremely important, because the common, let's say, on the average, citizen communicates with the government once, maybe twice a year. You pay your taxes, and maybe you do something else during the year. So the quality is extremely important. It's not something that you use every day, so it has to be intuitive, etc. And one of the things that we have learned in living in our e-government society is that less is more. So the easier it is, the more you automate, etc., the better. And we are doing exactly the things that you are saying. That what is your area of expertise? We have a special team in place for a couple of years now that has only one focus: to improve government services, and we are seeing really, really good results. We have never had such a positive or loads of positive feedback on the things that we have done right from the square one. So this is a very, very important topic, that if you do something, then do it well from scratch.
Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know. Are there any now? It doesn't seem so. Maybe I could ask Honza Bocek, who is a journalist here from Economia. He is dedicating himself to data journalism. Honza, could you comment a little bit on the use of data in Czech media for us, please?
Now I have the microphone, thank you. Just a few moments ago, Aet said that the data is quite boring for journalists. I cannot agree. I think there are many journalists who try to work with data. Just the problem is that the ordinary journalists don't do that. Yeah, there have to be a special guy in an office to work with the data. So I would say that the main problem of the media is the ordinary journalists, while the special guys who work or the office wants to have a journalist who can work with data, but the ordinary journalist, they don't do.
If you are talking about the service for people, if you work with data, what is your experience with the formats that you get from different offices? What troubles maybe you have been facing in the past or now?
It's a question for the whole presentation of all the methods. that government uses to hide their data, like PDF format and all the other basically picture formats. Okay, generally it's a very bad experience with the government showing some data.
What do you think can be done with that? Some kind of cooperation really to improve this? Because Honza is confirming that there is this problem that we've been touching before.
Well, again, certainly from our statistical experience, the PDF was mentioned as a way of hiding data, but we're certainly in the UK, when we publish official statistical releases, although the commentary, etc., is in a PDF, it's also in general sort of text online, and also where there's any chart or anything, you can click on a link to get the underlying data. So wherever possible, the data are made available. As well as links to a wider data set if it exists to inform that issue as a whole. So as far as possible, there's a good sort of ethos to try and make available as much as possible that relates to that particular story. One example, for example, measures of inflation, very sort of contentious issue quite often, which measure of inflation should you use for which purpose? And when a retail price index is published or a consumer price index, it used to be that you just publish the monthly figure. But now a lot of the underlying information is also published, and there's an online tool where you can actually create your own inflation measure. So if you have a particular basket of how much you buy in terms of food, how much you spend on transport and so on, you can use the official data to create your own. How is inflation affecting me, as opposed to the national single figure that was published? And I think that's the way of actually just informing the citizen more, giving them more information, rather than just the one figure which may hide multitude of sins.
I think this also touches on an area that's going to be increasingly important around open data, which is provenance. And where did this information come from? And this provenance, both in the sense of you read a claim in a story and you can link to an underlying data set that supports that claim, but also the provenance that's associated with the methodology that goes into producing a national statistic, or the checks that have gone into a legal notice that says that a company is insolvent before that notice is published, or the process that has gone into handling a legislation document before it appears online. How do you know that this is what it purports to be? For what it's worth, I think one of the best things that governments can do is start to make the provenance of the information that we publish, the provenance of our open data, available with the data. So people can make better decisions about high trust, high provenance sources, as part of just trying to create a wider norm about saying where information comes from and describing something about how it has come to be.
Thank you. I've been talking to Josef Schlerka, who is the Chief of New Media Studies at the Philosophical Faculty here in Prague, and they are cooperating on a project with Czech Statistical Office. And he was saying, well, I do believe in open data, but what we see maybe as a problem is not that they are not willing to give us the data, but how it is published and the form of it, and sometimes they are not aware of simple things. Maybe it's too technical, and it would only help to formulate it in a better way, in a simpler way, to make it more usable for us and for general public. So sometimes maybe it's about a very short comment, a small feedback, just to be in touch with somebody who gives this feedback. Adam, would you have any idea how to encourage these links? Because maybe it's really not that the offices are like closed and don't want to do anything, but there is just this small trick to make it better.
A quick fix, you mean?
Well, but
Something I can
this is
think of in
basically-
like 2 minutes, and it will work for like 20 years.
No, how to connect maybe these people,
no,
to
no.
help government to
Actually,
give this feedback.
I had another question for Honza, if I may.
And would you answer mine first, please?
Well, it's partly based on what will Honza
No,
say.
I was just kidding.
Honza, what actually do you need the data for? Why you like data, working with data, and what do you do with it? What's the end goal? Why?
Adam, hi.
Hello.
Two guys from Brno.
Yeah, but we don't know each other, which
You're
is
lying.
an exception. Yeah, the final reason, the goal, is to write a story, of course, as someone said in the panel.
Why do you like writing stories then?
I didn't say I like it, but basically I'm a journalist, so I have to do.
But well, go.
Like really?
Yeah, because when I have the data set, I have to make, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that answer right now.
No worries.
That reason I do my job. But I'm trying to find the story in the data to show there is some problem in the government or generally there is some interesting in the data. But I like the first part better, to showing some problems of the government.
Okay, so I need that kind of context to understand actually what the data as such plays in person's life. You know, without understanding that, we can spend hours talking about how it should function, but without understanding how often he works with the data, what he tries to achieve, what are the typical ways or typical technology, computers, programs, software applications that he is using, I couldn't really say what would be the best to fix that problem. That's why it's so important to do a good user research.
I think that's true up to a point, because we also have resources that are generic, like a computer. I can program a computer and use it in a whole plethora of different ways, or I can load software that someone has programmed for me. And data similarly can be used for many different purposes, one of which may be by a data journalist, but also by an economic purpose, to build a business or to improve public services. And there's an element where the emphasis for public agencies needs to be on making the data that we have available and feasibly well. Now, Richard Sterling from the Open Data Institute, his organisation has made a wonderful tool called the Open Data Certificates. And if you want to know how you do open data well, use the Open Data Institute's Open Data Certificates, which we're using in the UK for understanding how we publish our open data well in government. But it's about how you maximise the possible set of uses that your data could be put to, rather than just, I mean, it's important to identify particular contexts of use, but I think we need to keep hold of the idea that the data can be used for many purposes, not just the one for which it was designed or intended.
Yes, I would do like 300 of those interviews, you know, before really providing the answer, because even the open data certificate must be based on something. There definitely will be a long tail kind of thing where you have a majority of users using, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 formats, and then you will have some extreme users using like very specific formats, and it's a matter of like shifting the line. Is it extreme enough so we don't include it in the solution? You know, and that kind of thinking. If you want to really understand a large population of users, it would be really, really a long time talking to them.
Yes. But basically you are saying we shouldn't just run because this is the trend, but also to concentrate really on the type of usage, and we know that there are really different approaches of people who use this data. Am I
Yeah,
right?
that's for sure. I mean, like my colleague said it already, that most of the data will not be used. most probably, I don't know. And if we have a situation like this, I would first concentrate on people who are extreme users, meaning using data every day, every hour, or something like that. And then I would go and, try to satisfy the needs of the users who are using it, I don't know, once a week, once a month, or something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I would also like to comment shortly. First of all, I wish we had more journalists like you. I just wanted to point that out because for us, we have the legislation in place that all the data that has no restrictions, special restrictions, has to be opened up by 1st of January next year in machine-readable format. And at the moment, since we don't have enough people knocking behind our doors that, I want to create this service or I want to do this study or whatever, it's quite difficult to justify why we have taken such a radical approach. Another thing that I wanted to comment about, again, I agree that you have to know how the data is used or what is the most interesting bits and pieces of this information sets to create some, let's say, pretty graphs and things on top of it so that majority of people, just by looking at some web page, could get the general idea of what's going on in this area. But then again, I think that there are a lot of mistakes done in terms of, when the original source of the data enables opening the data up as well in machine-readable format, then this should also be always included. It's nice to create these human-readable, nice graphs, etc., and it is a bonus, and we have some examples in that area. But, it really, really pisses me off when I see this beautiful graph and I can't download the data to work with the data so that how I want to do it. And also, opening the data up is only the first step. The real benefits start to come when we start using the linked data technologies, etc., combining the data sets, etc., and without machine-readable formats, that's impossible.
Dev, are you a fan of applications built on data or publishing it with the data?
So, I'm keen on actually doing all of the above, I think. And the example that I'm going to talk about later on, about that neighbourhood statistics application, that was very much about an initiative about creating a data store from administrative data that's held in various different parts of government, bringing it together so that you have very good information about every small area in the country. But what you can then do is allocate each of those areas to different types of classifications. So whether you want to look at deprived areas, we have indices of deprivation which allocate, these are the 10% most deprived areas, where are the pockets of deprivation in the country. And if you want to then compare those deprived areas with other parts of the country, what's the situation, what's different about these areas, you can do that. Then we have a classification of urban and rural sort of spectrum. There's 6 different categories, whether it's an urban area close to a city, away from a city, remote rural areas. So by classifying each of those areas, you can look at what are the issues in each of those different types of areas, the most rural areas, what are the key issues there. And that's sort of squeezing more out of the same data set, just by looking at it from different dimensions. And whilst that's, the potential for doing all of that online is there for anyone, what we need to do, and we have an analytical team in the Office for National Statistics, is they try to actually write analytical articles by doing some of the exploring themselves. And that helps people to then sort of get ideas, okay, we can do this as well. And on top of that, there's an online sort of training mechanism. There's an online training modules that you can just click on to say, talk people through how we can use different parts of that website. And that's all very much to do with trying to, not just yourself get more out of the data, but help others to get more out of the information.
Okay, any questions popping up for the moment? I have another one concerning the development of people's needs. Sorry. Now the time is very dynamic, and also the needs of users change quite often, and we have to analyze all the time how the situation is. If I got it right, in Great Britain, you had the experience also in terms of how it influences big tenders and IT projects in government offices. So how was this development, if you could comment briefly, maybe, John?
So we're trying to be more driven by users' needs and expectations in how we shape and deliver services. We're trying to be much more agile so that we can respond to users' needs as we understand them better. We're trying to, particularly with our digital services and our ICT contracts, we're trying to let much smaller contracts and involve a much wider group of companies in providing those services to government. So opening up the opportunity for small and middle-sized companies to compete and deliver government work in a way that hasn't been possible before, rooted in a coherent philosophy of public service delivery, rooted in need, of which open data is absolutely a core part of a much wider philosophy of public services reform.
How is the situation in Estonia?
Well, let's put it this way, that if we compare the investment sizes in whatever area in IT between Estonia and UK, then the numbers are not even comparable. But for some reason or somehow we have been able to do a lot with investing just a little bit. If we talk about numbers, then when we did a study trip to Denmark to see how they evaluate the IT projects, or how they make decisions about where to invest or where to not, then when we compared the investment sizes, then the level where they started to really look into the detailed information about the planned project was numbers so high that we don't even have so big projects. So basically, we tend to go with really small steps. Our big projects, the investments that are done are like 500,000 euros per project. That doesn't mean that the whole system will be built with this number. That means that you won't get more money until you can prove that you have spent that money well. So the agile approach has been a very native part in our IT sector. We did things in using agile methods before we knew that it's called agile. So and having really heavy prototyping along the way is definitely one of the key issues that helps to keep the investments a lot lower than they would be without that. So.
Okay, if there is no question, we can sum up this panel, I think. So I will ask you the last one, and it will be one question for all of you again. So just a brief recommendation. If the topic of this was open data for improved public services, what would you suggest, recommend, or what is maybe the idea provoked by this discussion to reflect on?
My one tip, build open data into your procurement.
Well done. Next one, please.
If I have to choose only one, that's a difficult one. The legislation is not enough. The raising of awareness, getting the community involved, etc. This is the huge part of harvesting the benefit. Where we at the moment feel that we have so much to learn. So we will definitely be talking to UK colleagues to learn more about how you have been so successful in getting the private sector and the community involved.
I have so many ideas running in my head, so I will be just brief. Give a design approach a chance.
Hold up flag for statisticians. A lot of policy initiatives, as policies are being developed, the statisticians get asked afterwards, can we have these indicators to measure this, what we've actually sort of decided on? But to involve the statistician and analysts from the beginning in your design of your policies, because quite often they can give you the evidence to make those policies better.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the final idea of all this is to cooperate better between all different points of view. Now a short break again for a coffee. So please grab a coffee and be back here at 14:45 because we will have new presentations coming. Thank you.